Welcome to our deep dive into Reconstruction.
Ooh.
Yeah, today we're gonna be time traveling
Time traveling.
back to 1865.
Okay.
We've got this mix of a history podcast episode
Mhm.
and then some really incredible firsthand accounts to kind of give us the inside scoop.
Oh, wow.
Our mission today.
Okay.
Well, we're not just gonna be reciting, dates and names,
Right.
but we want to understand how this era reshaped America
Mhm.
and what it actually felt like to live through it.
So imagine the South in 1865.
Okay.
The Civil War is over.
Right.
But the nation is reeling.
Oh, yeah.
750,000 dead. The South is in ruins.
Mm-hmm.
And 4 million formerly enslaved people are suddenly free.
But what does that even mean?
That's the question. What did it actually mean for those 4 million people?
And that's where Reconstruction comes in.
Yeah.
Right. Trying to rebuild the nation, the South especially,
Mhm.
but also rebuilding this idea of what it means to be free in America.
And even before the war ends, you have Lincoln in the middle of all this chaos already thinking about how to stitch the country back together.
Wow.
And so that's where his 10% plan comes in.
Okay.
It's all about swift reunification.
Okay.
So you pardon the Southerners who pledge loyalty to the Union,
Mm-hmm.
and once 10% of voters in a state do that, they can set up a new government.
So it sounds simple enough on paper, but was it really about healing?
Right.
Or was it just about getting things back to normal as quickly as possible?
Yeah.
Because, Lincoln even wrestled with this idea of black suffrage, right? Like the right to vote for black men.
Yeah.
He pushed Louisiana to give them that right.
Right.
But they refused.
And that's a key insight there. It
Yeah.
just shows how even in this moment of supposed progress,
Right.
that resistance to equality was already there.
Yeah.
That tension between, a quick reunion and actual justice,
Yeah.
it was there from the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you have these fiery, radical Republicans in Congress. Right? Yes.
Like Senator Benjamin Wade, who really wanted to transform the South, not just patch it up.
Mm,
They're pushing for full citizenship and equality for black people,
yes.
which put them at odds even with Lincoln at times.
Yeah, Wade Ward, for example, criticized Lincoln for being too lenient on the South.
Oh, wow.
And these weren't just political disagreements.
Right.
These were fundamental clashes over who gets to define freedom.
Yeah.
Is it Congress,
Mhm.
the president,
Right.
the South itself?
Such a good question.
That question was at the heart of everything.
It's fascinating to see how all those political battles played out.
Yeah.
But I want to step away from Washington, D.C. for a moment.
Okay.
Let's imagine you're a black minister in Savannah in 1865,
Okay.
and you're meeting with General Sherman himself.
Oh, wow.
You're advocating for land ownership as the true path to freedom for freed people.
Mm.
And that meeting leads to one of the most significant but ultimately tragic moments of Reconstruction, Sherman's Special Field Order number 15.
Okay.
This set aside 400,000 acres of land for black families.
Wow.
This is the origin of the 40 acres and a mule promise.
Right.
It offered this incredible glimmer of hope, this vision of self-sufficiency and independence.
A vision that would be heartbreakingly short-lived.
Yeah.
Because then, just as things are getting started, Lincoln's assassinated.
Yeah.
Enter Andrew Johnson, a Southern Democrat, and get this, a former slave owner himself.
Yeah, so Johnson is one of those figures who defies easy categorization.
I can imagine.
On one hand, he despises the wealthy planter class.
Okay.
On the other, he doesn't believe in racial equality.
So he's not exactly a champion for black rights.
No, not really.
Even though he's not fond of the old Southern elite either.
Exactly.
So interesting.
And this inherent contradiction would shape his whole presidency and his approach to Reconstruction.
Yeah.
He was quick to punish the wealthy Confederates.
Okay.
Yet he wouldn't support policies that gave black people true equality.
It's a classic example of how even those who seem progressive on the surface
Yeah.
can still be deeply tied to the systems they claim to oppose.
Hmm.
And that internal conflict, right,
Yeah.
within Johnson sets the stage for this power struggle with Congress that'll have this massive impact on the trajectory of Reconstruction.
Right.
But while the politicians are busy arguing, black communities are taking their futures into their own hands.
Yeah, it's remarkable, really. Reuniting families torn apart by slavery,
Wow.
building churches and schools,
Mm-hmm.
creating their own systems of self-governance.
Yeah.
It's a testament to their resilience and their determination to forge this new path.
Yeah, this is where those firsthand accounts really bring the story to life.
Yeah.
You can really hear the hope, the fear, the sheer will to make freedom mean something real.
Absolutely. But then, just as these communities are building their new lives, this wave of setbacks washes over them.
Oh no, what do you mean?
So Johnson begins issuing pardons to former Confederate leaders,
Wow.
effectively welcoming them back into the fold.
That's a big step.
And the land promised to black families under Sherman's order.
Yeah.
Well, that gets ripped away.
Right, the land is taken up back.
Yeah, Johnson, under pressure from former landowners, starts reversing Sherman's order, arguing that the federal government had overstepped its bounds.
Wow.
And to further restrict black people's newfound freedom, Southern states start enacting black codes.
Black codes, what are those?
These are laws specifically designed to limit the rights and freedoms of black people.
Like, give me an example.
So like restricting their movement,
Mm-hmm.
their ability to own property,
Wow.
even their right to work certain jobs.
Wow.
It was basically a way to recreate the conditions of slavery under a different name.
So instead of moving towards freedom and equality, things are starting to backslide.
Exactly. Imagine you're a freed person on Modesto Island.
Okay.
You finally got your own plot of land.
Right.
You're starting to build a life for yourself and your family.
Yeah.
And then a Freedmen's Bureau agent shows up with this crushing news. You have to leave.
Oh my God.
The land is being returned to its former owner.
That's like a punch in the gut.
Yeah.
All that hope,
Yeah.
all that hard work just gone.
That moment, for me, just encapsulates the precarious nature of freedom during Reconstruction.
Yeah.
Promises made and then broken.
Mm.
The vulnerability of black communities in the face of those who wanted to maintain the old power structures.
It makes you wonder how people coped with that kind of disappointment and betrayal.
Yeah.
Like, where do you even go from there?
Well, that's a question we'll explore in our next dive.
Okay. Yeah.
Because, as you might imagine, news of these black codes, the violence, the broken promises, it all reaches Congress.
Yeah.
And let's just say they are not pleased.
Especially the radical Republicans.
Oh, yeah. They saw Johnson's actions as like a betrayal of everything they fought for during the war. To them, he was letting the South just recreate the same oppressive system, just without the official label of slavery.
So what did Congress do?
Well, they didn't just stand by and let Johnson call all the shots.
I imagine not.
They came back, swinging, ready to take the reins of Reconstruction and steer it in a different direction.
Okay, how did they do that?
Well, first they made this powerful symbolic statement.
What was that?
They refused to seat the newly elected representatives from the southern states.
Oh, wow.
Remember, a lot of these were former Confederates eager to get back into the halls of power.
Yeah.
And blocking them sent a very clear message to Johnson and the South. The old ways weren't going to fly anymore.
Yeah, I see. That's a bold move for sure.
And they also established this Joint Committee on Reconstruction.
What's that?
It was a group specifically tasked with investigating conditions in the South and figuring out a new path forward.
Okay, so kind of like a fact-finding mission.
Exactly. This committee was like a detective squad, gathering evidence of violence and justice, and just the overall failure of Johnson's policies to protect black rights.
So Congress is building a case against Johnson's approach.
Right, and this is where we see this real turning point in Reconstruction.
Oh, happens.
Congress realizes they need to use their full legislative power to guarantee equality for black Americans.
Wow.
No more half measures. And they started by passing the Civil Rights Act of 1866.
Okay, that sounds familiar.
This landmark piece of legislation granted citizenship to all people born in the U.S., regardless of race.
That's huge.
A huge step forward,
Yeah.
although it is important to note that it excluded Native Americans,
Oh, right.
highlighting the ongoing injustices that they faced.
Yeah,
But for black people, this was a direct challenge to those black codes we talked about,
right.
and firmly established the federal government's role in protecting civil rights.
Okay, so that's a major win for the radical Republicans.
Right.
And kind of a blow to Johnson's vision of Reconstruction.
And to make sure Johnson couldn't just veto the Civil Rights Act and sweep it under the rug, Congress did something unprecedented.
What was that?
They passed it again with enough votes to override any presidential objections.
Oh, wow.
Talk about a power move.
Yeah, they're serious.
So the Civil Rights Act becomes law, even with Johnson's resistance.
Okay, what happens next in this tug of war between Congress and the president?
Congress keeps the momentum going.
Yeah.
They know they need something even more permanent to protect black rights,
Yeah.
something that can't be easily overturned by a future president,
Mm-hmm.
or a change in the political winds.
Okay.
So they proposed the 14th Amendment to the Constitution.
Ooh, this is a big one.
Yeah, the 14th Amendment is considered one of the most important amendments in American history.
I can see why.
It fundamentally redefined what it meant to be an American citizen and laid the groundwork for future civil rights movements.
That's amazing.
It guaranteed equal protection under the law for all citizens and prohibited states from denying anyone life, liberty, or property without due process of law.
So not only does it affirm black citizenship, but it also restricts the power of individual states to discriminate against them.
Right.
Wow, this seems like a huge step towards a more just and equitable society.
Absolutely. But it wasn't just about rights, it was also about power.
How so?
Well, the 14th Amendment shifted the balance away from the president and towards Congress,
Okay.
giving them the authority to enforce his provisions.
So it's like a check and balance on presidential power.
Yeah, a huge blow to Johnson and anyone who wanted to maintain the old order.
Okay, so Congress is really flexing its muscles here, asserting its power to shape Reconstruction. How did they put this power into action?
They passed the Reconstruction Act of 1867.
Okay, what did this act do?
This act divided the former Confederacy into 5 military districts, each governed by a Union general.
Whoa, military occupation. That's a pretty drastic measure.
It was a clear message that the South was not going to be allowed to just slip back into its old ways.
So what was the goal of this?
Well, the key condition for the Southern states to rejoin the Union was that they had to ratify the 14th Amendment.
Oh,
Congress was basically saying, look, if you want back in, you got to accept these fundamental changes.
no more black codes, no more denying black people basic rights.
Right.
Okay, so it sounds like Congress was really trying to rebuild the South from the ground up based on principles of equality and justice.
Exactly.
How did President Johnson react to all of this?
Well, he was furious.
I can imagine.
He saw all of these actions as a direct attack on his presidential authority.
Right.
He vetoed the Reconstruction Act,
Okay.
only to have Congress override his veto.
Oh, wow.
He tried to fire radical Republicans from his cabinet.
Oh.
And this ultimately led to him becoming the first U.S. president to be impeached by the House of Representatives.
Impeachment. Wow. So it was like a full-blown showdown.
It was a political battle for the ages. Two completely different visions of Reconstruction clashing head-on.
Okay, so Johnson wanted a swift reunion, even if it meant sacrificing black rights.
Right.
And Congress, on the other hand, was determined to make racial justice the cornerstone of the nation's rebirth.
Yes. And in this battle, it seems like Congress was winning.
What happened with Johnson's impeachment?
Well, he narrowly avoided removal by the Senate just by 1 vote.
Wow.
But his power was significantly diminished. He became a lame duck president, largely sidelined for the rest of his term.
Okay, so with Johnson kind of out of the picture, what happened to Reconstruction? Did it finally start to achieve its goals?
Well, with Johnson out of the way, Reconstruction efforts gained momentum. Black men were finally granted the right to vote with the passage of the 15th Amendment in 1870.
This is incredible. Black men were finally able to participate in the political process, to have a say in their own future.
It was a period of remarkable progress and empowerment.
Yeah.
We see black men voting in droves, electing black officials to local, state, and even federal positions. Wow. There were black sheriffs, judges, state legislators, and even black representatives and senators in Congress.
That's amazing.
Imagine that just a few years after the end of slavery, you have black men holding positions of power in the very institutions that had once denied them basic human rights.
It must felt like a revolution, a complete overturning of the old order.
It did, but of course history rarely moves in a straight line.
Right.
And this progress did not come without challenges.
What kind of challenges?
Well, the backlash to these advancements was fierce, and often violent groups like the Ku Klux Klan formed during this period used terror and intimidation to try to suppress black voting, disrupt black communities, and restore white supremacy.
So as Black Americans were making strides towards equality, they were also facing this wave of violence and oppression from those who wanted to maintain the old power dynamics.
Exactly, and it wasn't just the Klan.
Oh.
Other paramilitary groups like the White League and the Red Shirts emerged across the South, all with the aim of terrorizing black communities and undermining Reconstruction.
So think of them as like organized vigilante groups.
Right, often with ties to local law enforcement or even government officials who acted with impunity to enforce white supremacy.
It sounds like this era of hope and progress was also a time of immense fear and danger. How did the federal government respond to this surge of violence?
Well, President Grant, who took office in 1869, did try to intervene. He used federal troops to crack down on the Klan and protect black voters, but it was an uphill battle, and the resources and the political will to sustain these efforts were gradually waning.
Why was that? Did people just stop caring about what was happening in the South?
It was a complex mix of factors.
Yeah.
The North was facing its own economic challenges, and there was this growing sense of fatigue with the seemingly endless task of reconstructing the South.
I see.
Some people began to argue that the South had been punished enough that it was time to move on and let them govern themselves.
So the initial idealism of Reconstruction was starting to fade as people focused on other priorities.
Right? And this shift in public opinion created an opening for opponents of Reconstruction to gain traction.
Oh, how so?
Well, they argued that black Americans were incapable of self-government,
Wow.
that federal intervention was an overreach, and that it was time to restore states' rights, even if it meant sacrificing black rights.
So the very ideals that Reconstruction was built on equality justice, federal protection of civil rights were starting to be questioned and undermined.
Exactly. And this gradual erosion of support for Reconstruction, combined with the ongoing violence and the political machinations of those who wanted to restore the old order, set the stage for its eventual demise.
It sounds like we're approaching a turning point, a shift away from the progress we've been discussing. What were some of the key events that marked this decline of Reconstruction?
One of the most significant blows came with the Compromise of 1877.
Okay.
This deal struck after a contested presidential election essentially traded the removal of federal troops from the South for the presidency of Rutherford B. Hayes.
Wait, so the very forces that were there to protect black rights and enforce Reconstruction policies were pulled out of the South as part of a political deal.
It was.
That's devastating.
Yeah, it left black communities incredibly vulnerable to violence and political disenfranchisement, with federal oversight gone. Southern states wasted no time in dismantling the progress that had been made during Reconstruction.
How would they do that?
Well, they implemented a series of measures specifically designed to disenfranchise black voters and strip them of their political power.
What kind of measures?
We're talking about things like poll taxes, which required people to pay a fee to vote,
Oh, wow.
literacy tests, which were often rigged to prevent black people from passing,
Wow.
and grandfather clauses, which exempted white voters from these requirements if their ancestors had been eligible to vote before the Civil War.
So these were intentionally discriminatory policies designed to create barriers for black voters while making it easier for white people to vote and hold office.
Exactly, and sadly, these tactics were incredibly effective.
Oh, yeah.
Black participation in politics plummeted, and white Southerners regained control of their state governments. The era of black political empowerment that we saw during Reconstruction was effectively over.
This is heartbreaking. All that progress, all that hope, just gone. It seems like the promise of Reconstruction, that vision of a truly just and equitable society, was ultimately betrayed.
It's a tragic chapter in American history, and it's important to understand how this betrayal happened, how the forces of white supremacy were able to regain control and impose this new form of racial oppression on the South.
So what happened next? Did black communities just accept this defeat? Did they give up on the fight for equality?
No, they didn't give up. They never gave up. Black communities continued to resist these injustices. They found ways to build their lives and maintain their hope in the face of just immense obstacles.
So even though they were stripped of their political power, they didn't let that extinguish their spirit or their determination to create a better future for themselves and their children.
Exactly. And this period saw the rise of black-owned newspapers, businesses, and schools, all serving as these vital hubs for community building and resistance.
I see.
Think about institutions like the Tuskegee Institute, founded by Booker T. Washington,
Oh.
which focused on providing vocational training and promoting economic self-sufficiency for black people.
Yeah, so these were like the seeds of the civil rights movement, planted in this fertile ground of resilience and hope.
Right, and it wasn't just about economic progress.
Right. There was also a continued fight for civil rights.
Absolutely. The fight for equality didn't end with the Compromise of 1877. Organizations like the NAACP, founded in 1909, emerged to challenge segregation and discrimination through legal means, laying the groundwork for those landmark victories of the civil rights movement in the decades to come.
So even though Reconstruction failed to achieve its full potential, it planted the seeds for future progress. And it's a reminder that social change is this long and winding road with setbacks and victories along the way.
Yeah, precisely. And I think it's important to acknowledge that the legacy of Reconstruction is complex.
I agree.
It was a period of both remarkable achievements and missed opportunities, a time of both hope and heartbreak.
Yeah, we saw the expansion of civil rights, the rise of black political power, the creation of these new institutions, and the beginnings of a more just and equitable society. But we also saw the enduring power of white supremacy, the limits of federal power, and the fragility of progress in the face of fierce resistance.
And those failures had long-lasting consequences. The end of Reconstruction ushered in this era of Jim Crow segregation,
Right.
a system of laws and social customs designed to enforce racial hierarchy and deny black people their basic rights.
Hmm.
This period saw the rise of lynching, disenfranchisement, and this widespread discrimination that would plague the South for nearly a century.
It's a sobering reminder of how easily progress can be undone, how quickly the tide can turn against those fighting for justice and equality.
It is, but it also highlights the resilience and the determination of those who continue to push for change, even in the face of such adversity.
So, what can we learn from this deep dive into Reconstruction? What insights can we take away from this complex and often painful chapter in American history?
Well, for me, it's a reminder that progress is never guaranteed.
Mm-hmm.
It requires constant vigilance,
Mm.
a willingness to challenge injustice, and a commitment to holding our leaders accountable.
Yeah.
It also highlights the importance of understanding history, not just as a collection of facts and dates, but as this living narrative that shapes our present and our future.
I like that.
By grappling with the complexities of Reconstruction, we can gain a deeper understanding of the challenges we face today, as well as find inspiration in the courage and resilience of those who fought for a better world.
Yeah, and perhaps most importantly, it compels us to ask ourselves, what role will we play in shaping the next chapter of this ongoing struggle for justice and equality?
Because the fight for a truly just and equitable society is far from over. It's a fight that continues to this day, and it's up to each of us to decide how we will contribute to this ongoing struggle.
Well said. So, as we conclude this deep dive into Reconstruction, let's not just close the book on this period. Let's carry its lessons with us, using them to inform our actions and inspire us to build a future that truly lives up to the promise of equality and justice for all.